In this example, I'm going to show you how to make a qualitative frequency distribution and some important scenarios that we need to consider when we're making a qualitative frequency distribution. So in this example, we're going to look at a small commuter airline in the West. Here we're looking at customer complaints. And these complaints are only for 2 months out of a single year. And we have them listed here as to what the complaint was about, and we have the count of how many people had that complaint in each month. So what we're going to do is take this information and we're going to classify the items into 4 different categories: comfort, price, service, and schedule. And then we're going to make a qualitative frequency distribution. Okay, so comfort. I'm going to say that comfort would qualify as, let's see, seats too stiff, airplane too hot or too cold, and I would put the plane looking shabby on the inside under comfort. And then for price, I would say tickets cost too much. That's pretty much it for price. Service, I think customer service. So stewardess did not provide blankets. I would put that as service. Maybe poor reservation system, I would put as service. And then schedule, schedule's not convenient and the plane was often late. Okay, so I've tagged them by color here using my highlighters, so I know which categories I'm counting as comfort, price, service, and schedule. And so what I'm going to do is make a frequency distribution. So I'm going to list our 4 categories here in one column, and then the counts for March and the counts for July. So I'm going to set up that frequency distribution. Okay, so I've set up my frequency distribution. What I need to do now is make sure that I tally up the correct values to write here for March and July. So everything that I've tagged for comfort, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 items, right? I need to total up those 4 values for March and those 4 values for July to type here, because I'm counting each of these complaints as a comfort complaint. So off to the side, what I'm going to do is add 3, 6, 8, and 5, because those are the number of comfort-related complaints in March. And that totals 22, so I know in March this company received 22 comfort complaints. And I'll do the same thing for July. So 3 and 20 and 5 and 6, 34, so 34 comfort complaints in July. And I just want to repeat that process for all my other categories. Price, we only flagged 1 item here for price. So really in March, they just had 11 complaints for comfort and 11 complaints for price and 15 in July for price. And so we're just going to fill in these last 4 cells right here by following the same idea for service and schedule. Okay, so you can see here that I have completed this qualitative frequency distribution. Now remember, what makes this qualitative is that we choose the categories to classify the data. So, I mean, while these categories were given to us, we are choosing which of these complaints to put in each of these categories here. Okay, so now in number 2, we're going to do something extremely similar, but now we're going to classify the items a little bit differently. So we're going to classify them by plane, personnel, building or equipment, and then an other category. So we're going to classify these complaints based on whether or not they have to do with the plane. Personnel would be employees, the building or equipment, and then everything else goes into the other category. So I'm going to set up that frequency distribution now. Okay, so make sure when you're creating your frequency distribution that it's very important that you include the titles. So we really need to make sure that our frequency distributions still say things like type of complaint and labeling the months, as well as labeling the names of our categories over here. So just make sure you always keep your labels, the titles of the columns or the titles of the rows. Those are really important to write every single time. Okay, so now let's actually solve this problem. So we're going to flag, again, the complaints up here in the original based on whether or not they relate to the plane, personnel, building, equipment, or other. So instead of using highlighters this time, maybe I'll use really simple to draw emojis. So if the complaint has to do with the plane, I'm going to draw a sad face next to it. So let's see. Okay, so for plane, I'm going to put, let's see, how about the plane was often late. Let's do that one. The seats were too stiff. Maybe that's equipment. The airplane was too hot or too cold. Let's put that as the plane. The plane interior looks shabby. Let's put that as the plane. Okay, so for personnel, maybe I'll do a star. So personnel has everything to do with the staff. So stewardess did not provide blankets. I'd say that's personnel related. Let's see. Okay. Building / equipment. So maybe for this one I put a triangle. Maybe instead of emojis I'm doing shapes. Okay. Building and equipment. I would put seats too stiff. I mean, that's not good. Poor reservation system. Looks like equipment, so I might put that there. All right, and then other is everything else. So what I'm going to do is my side work again, and I'm going to add up the totals and fill those into my table and get those values set up in there. Okay, so you can see that I filled in the table with the correct values here, adding up the ones I've marked as plane, personnel, building, equipment, and other for the 2 months. Okay, so this isn't too bad if you're asked to recategorize the data and create a qualitative frequency distribution out of it. This is how it's done. And oftentimes in statistics, we don't just want to look at the data, we want to make draw some conclusions from that data or note some possible discrepancies in that data. And so for number 3, would another person necessarily assign the same items to the same categories as you have, or in this example, as I have? Discuss the implications of this when reviewing data collected and distributed by someone else for open answer questions. So this is a really good thing to note, is that assigning these things into categories, it wasn't always clear or as cut and dry as you'd like it to be. So no, someone wouldn't necessarily assign these items to these categories in the same way as I have. So no, someone may not assign these the same way that I have. So we've established that not everyone has the same perspective or has the same background. And based on those differences, they'd probably assign these categories differently. So we need to pay attention to who is preparing this data if it's more qualitative and not as cut and dry as quantitative. So that needs to be taken into consideration. Someone who might think that seats aren't equipment, like I thought, maybe because the seats are attached to the plane, you would classify that as the plane. And that does open things up to discussion based on why it was put into that category. And those are good discussions to have when you're analyzing your data. So in number 4, my last question for this example is, do the categories chosen in parts 1 and 2 meet the requirement that categories be mutually exclusive and exhaustive? So mutually exclusive as one term and exhaustive as the other. So in parts 1 and 2, we were asked to classify into these categories here: comfort, price, service, and schedule, plane, personnel, building, equipment, and other. Now, do these categories meet the criteria of being mutually exclusive? And I say yes. Yes, mutually exclusive, because each complaint was only counted in one category. And that's really important. We don't want that double counting overlapping in our data all the time. Sometimes it's okay. But in this case, the categories were mutually exclusive because we didn't double count the complaints as being related to the plane and the equipment. It was either plane or equipment. So then, was the list of categories exhaustive? Okay. What this means is, did the list of categories take care of all of the complaints that we were looking at, right? Was it exhaustive? Was there anything that we had to leave out when we put them into categories? And the answer is no, nothing was left out, which means these categories were exhaustive because they included all of the information and nothing was left out. Great, so then I just wrote that in there. Because each complaint was assigned to a category, i.e. none of them were left out, the categories are exhaustive. So I hope this example helped you with your studies. Remember to always read the text. In statistics, we need to pay as much attention to the conclusions and the sentence and the reasoning behind the data as much as we need to pay attention to the actual data. So make sure you're reading your text and following along.